Hello, it's Concord Wind. Um, I just want to promote two of my newest videos. There is a testimony of rejection and insight into testimony of rejection. Those go hand in hand. I would recommend listening to the song first, testimony of rejection, and then listening or watching, the sermon, insight into testimony of rejection. If you're on TikTok, what does it look like on TikTok? Shush. Save login, yeah. So there's testimony of rejection and there's insight into testimony of rejection. So that's what they look like if you go to my profile. And on Rumble, what does it look like on Rumble? It's pretty much the same as YouTube. There's a testimony of rejection, the song, and then insight into testimony of rejection, the sermon. So those are good, I want people to listen to those. Anyways, I prepared a passage of God's words, so let's read it. God says, one should reflect on whether they love the truth and have true faith in God in light of their attitude toward various situations and people, events and things. If one can come to know their corrupt disposition and see how great their rebellion is against God, then they will have grown. Furthermore, when it comes to affairs that involve their treatment of God, one should reflect on whether they have notions, fear, or submission in their treatment of God's name and incarnation, and especially what their attitude is in regard to the truth. A person should also know their deficiencies, their stature, and whether they have the truth reality, as well as whether their pursuit and the path they walk are correct and in accordance with God's intentions. These are all things that people should know. In summary, the various aspects of self-knowledge essentially consist of the following: knowledge of whether one's caliber is high or low, knowledge of one's character, knowledge of the intents and motives one has in their actions, knowledge of the corrupt disposition and nature essence that one reveals, knowledge of one's preferences and pursuit, knowledge of the path one walks, knowledge of one's views on things, knowledge of one's outlook on life and values, and knowledge of one's attitude toward God and the truth. Self-knowledge is mainly comprised of these aspects. All right, so let's go through them. Let's test my self-knowledge, because I have a feeling I don't have very good self-knowledge based on the criteria God has given here. Knowledge of whether one's caliber is high or low, I'm able to understand the truth, so I either have average or high caliber, I think, knowledge of one's character. My character, what is my character, right? My character, I'm a kind person. I have human kindness, but I'm not going to go out of my way to help someone. Typically, if someone asks me for help, I'll help them, but I'm not going to go out of my way to help someone. I like anime, some of my favorite anime are ReZero, Black Clover, Jujutsu Kaisen, so those, hobbies, I do like making music. I'm interested in music. Knowledge of one's character. I can be silly at times. I can be sarcastic, and you guys don't see that side of me. But I can be sarcastic. I can be silly. I can say stuff that's silly. It's part of my personality, my character. Knowledge of the intents and motives one has in their actions. Most of my actions involve serving God. But I do watch anime and work on music, and the music is to serve God as well. But watching anime, that I'm not doing that to serve God. I'm doing that for my own enjoyment, for my own entertainment. Let's see. When I go over to my parents' house, I do that. The motivation behind doing that is I feel obligated, because my family, and I help my family out sometimes, and it's because they help me out all of the time, and I felt obligated. They don't believe in Almighty God, so there's kind of there's tension between me and my family for sure, and I feel as though I must follow the words of Jesus, and forsake my family, but I can't do that because I rely on them, and so I feel obligated to spend time with them out of obligation because of what they do for me, and they don't get in the way of my duty. I'm able to perform my duty and still go over and spend time with them. Knowledge of the corrupt disposition and nature essence that one reveals, my corrupt disposition, my philosophy for living was, based in psychology. I studied psychology. And I believed that manipulating people was psychology, and there was nothing wrong with it. And that lying and deceiving people was psychology, and there's nothing wrong with that. Manipulating, lying, deceiving, controlling, it was all psychology to me. And so ideologically I was corrupt, believing in psychology. I was corrupted by psychology. In my principles, I was corrupt because I practiced psychology. And in my nature, I was deceitful. And then, of course, more so, my nature worshipped women because the goal of studying psychology, the goal of having ideological views of psychology and principles of psychology, the goal of all of that was to get inside the heads of women and make them like me, so that I could get married, so that I could keep a woman by my side, keep her loyal, manipulate her to stay loyal to me, manipulate her to love me, basically force her to love me, which is something that, like Satan forces people to worship, Buddha and great figures and, demons and demon kings and the ultimate goal that Satan has is for it itself to be worshipped, and it forces people, and God never forces people to worship him. And so as a created being, I should never have forced people or tried to force people to love me. People have their free will and they have their own choices, and you shouldn't try to manipulate someone's free will, put them in a corner and force them to make a choice. And we shouldn't treat God that way either, which I did that to God too. I tried to manipulate God. When I was in jail, I started fasting, and I fasted for 19 days. And I told God, I said, I'll never stop fasting until I either die or you get me out of jail. So I was putting him in a corner and forcing him to make a decision, and I should never have done that. So, my nature was manipulative, deceitful, and worshipped marriage, worshipped women, worshipped the beauty of women. That was basically my nature essence. And my principles and ideology were corrupted by psychology, basically. So, knowledge of one's preferences and pursuit. In my preferences, obviously, I prefer to read God's words and to preach on God's words and to contribute to mankind, to practice the truth. But I like anime too, and I like cold ones. That's another thing, And I have some flaws in my humanity, because I do like cigarettes and, but my pursuit is the truth. Knowledge of the path one walks. I walk the path of fearing God and shunning evil. I have flaws in my humanity, but ultimately that is the path I walk. Knowledge of one's views on things. I view the world, I see the world as corrupt, but I'm also not suspicious of others unless people give me reason to be suspicious. Like, my first reaction is not to be suspicious of someone, but if I catch someone, lying to me over and over, then I'll be like, oh, okay, this person is a liar, But I don't just assume someone's lying to me. I believe what people tell me until they give me a reason not to. And I believe that God governs all things and arranges all things for our benefit. And I see every situation as like, okay, what does God want me to learn from this situation? Or, oh, look, this is happening. What is God trying to instill into me through this situation, And I see suffering as a blessing from God. It keeps us humble. It keeps us appreciative of his grace and blessings, and it keeps us from getting bored of his grace and blessings, So suffering I see is beneficial. A lot of people don't see it that way, but and that's not the goal. That's not the point of believing in God, is to suffer. Actually the goal is to eventually be free from suffering, but in the meantime, suffering is beneficial. Knowledge of one's outlook on life and values. That's kind of what I was just talking about. I guess I got confused. Knowledge of one's view on things and one's outlook on life and values. Life. I guess I didn't talk about it, because now that I think about it, an outlook on life is a little bit different. An outlook on life, my outlook on life is that a life spent for the Creator, spent for loving the Creator, knowing the Creator, submitting to the Creator, experiencing his sovereignty, gaining the benefits that the Creator, wants to instill into a person, that's all very meaningful. And living for the Creator is very meaningful. My values, I value God's will, and I understand his will is for me to learn from every situation, from every arrangement, to understand the old sovereignty over everything, to have knowledge of him. It's to love him. It's to have a relationship with him. He wants his creation to return to his side. And I have definitely returned to his side. I'm definitely all for him. I'm dedicated. I'm loyal. I'm committed to him. Knowledge of one's attitude toward God and the truth. I love God and I love the truth, and I accept the truth and I practice the truth, and I believe God is, the most profound and meaningful thing in all of existence. And the truth is very profound. The truth is the expression of God, and my attitude is basically to accept all that comes from him. For I trust him, and I know that he has the best intentions, whether he blesses me or curses me, no matter what. I always trust him, always. Because I've seen time and time again, everything that he arranges is for my benefit, By the way, me and my mom and my sister took a picture together, and my teeth were really yellow, where I don't brush my teeth that much, and so I went home and brushed my teeth immediately, and I was like, dang, but I'm just afraid to brush my teeth too much because of the fluoride, but because fluoride is bad for the brain. So I try to limit my teeth brushing. I know fluoride's good for teeth, but it's bad for the brain, and I want to preserve my brain, but I want to protect my teeth too. So I brush my teeth every now and then, but I try to limit how much I brush my teeth, because I want to limit my fluoride intake, which is completely off topic. I'm sorry about that. But based on my self-knowledge and my evaluation on myself, I would say I got nothing to worry about. But I can't be content and satisfied with where I'm at. I have to continue to improve, continue to grow, continue to move forward, and continue to learn, because guess what? I don't know everything. It doesn't matter how much you guys think I'm knowledgeable of God and the truth. It doesn't matter how much you think, this guy's the GOAT. This guy really knows what he's talking about. This guy, understands the truth. I mean, he can really teach us a lot. And you know what? I can contribute as much as I can, but my experience, my knowledge is limited by the human condition. I'm just a human, and I can be forgetful at times too, because sometimes I'll come across a passage of God's words I've read 50 times, but because I haven't read it in a couple months, I'll completely have forgotten the words. And even though the meaning behind the words is instilled, into my heart, into my mind, but the words themselves are forgotten, and then I'll remember them once I read them, and I'll be like, man, the human brain is so limited. God only forgets what he wants to forget. He doesn't forget things like, involuntarily like we do, and, God's capacity is far greater than human capacity, far greater. And, the Christ is able to speak from divinity, which is very different. And even though the Christ is limited by the human condition, just like everybody else, but Christ can speak from divinity, which kind of separates him from the rest of mankind, even though he is a human too, and not only is he a human, but he's actually an ordinary and normal human, which is so lovely about him. And by the way, I've got a song, and it's the judgment of God. And I know this video is getting a little long. It's going to be tough to compress this video, and then, but I've got a song, Man Has No True Faith in Christ, and the thumbnail looks about the same on TikTok and Rumble. It's like the same thumbnail. Man Has No True Faith in Christ, and that's my favorite song I've produced so far. And it's judgment of the fact that man does not worship, love, admire, and revere the humility, the humbleness, the ordinariness, the normalness of Christ. Christ is ordinary and normal, and so humble, and so, and he suffers humiliation. And it's like, you should admire and love and respect and adore those elements of Christ. That's his best side. That's God's best side. And yet, God's best side are the things that people look down upon. They would rather worship great figures and celebrities because they have prestige, and they're famous and they're great, and they're lofty and grand. They have so much money, they can do whatever they want. They have the paparazzi following them. I mean, people worship people, in positions of power, and Christ is not, of course Christ rules over the entire universe in spirit, but in the flesh, he doesn't really rule over much of anything. And people look down on him for that. And, that's a shame, because that's the most beautiful side of God. It's kind of like, and it doesn't make sense to me that people don't worship Christ for his loveliness. It doesn't make sense to me that they don't worship him for his loveliness, because it's like, why do you like, kittens and puppies and bunnies and flowers, and why do you love those things? Why are you able to love those things, but you can't love Christ? Because Christ has a lot in common with puppies and kittens and bunnies and flowers. Because, kittens and bunnies and puppies and flowers, they don't have, prestige or power. They don't rule with authority. They're very humble and precious, adorable things, that can't do much of anything. They're very limited in capacity. And that's what makes them so endearing. They're so charming, and people love them. And Christ is even more lovely than those things, because he actually has intelligence and he's able to speak the truth. And he does so enduring the humiliation of being a man, when, God is beyond the human condition, and yet he humbles himself to be limited by the human condition by incarnating as a man. And he steps onto this filthy world and into this filthy society, facing the danger that comes with living on earth as a human. He's threatened by his fellow humans, threatened by his own creation. He lives among men, and he has normal humanity. He has a normal human brain. He's not famous. Nobody knows what he looks like except for a select few people. And, the opportunity to live in the same age as Christ is so rare, and to know him is such a rare opportunity. Most people on this planet don't know Christ. And so to worship him for his humility, for his humbleness, for who he really is. He's adorable. He's precious. And he's so humble. And, he doesn't argue. Unless he sees that somebody is seeking the truth. He may go back and forth with somebody if he knows they're seeking the truth. If somebody is retarded and they can't understand the truth at all, then he's not going to argue with them. He'll say, okay, well, I hope you find what you're looking for. He'll just, if they have an objection to his words or whatever, and they want to leave, he'll just let them leave. Like, he doesn't beg for people to stay. And I don't know. Everything about him is just wonderful. And you should really try to get to know Christ. And I think all of the books, from volume 1 to volume 7, all of the books can give you some knowledge of Christ. And so it doesn't matter what you read. Anything you read, you'll gain knowledge of Christ. But you can't be one-sided. Because a lot of God's words make Christ seem very imposing, and he's actually not. He's not. He just is able to speak from divinity, and in his divinity, he's able to express the anger, the frustration, the hurt, the wrath, the heartbreak of the Creator, and that makes Christ seem very imposing. But those words are just words, and they're static, and they don't actually fall upon people in reality. And that's because most of the judgment of God is executed through the word, and the facts do not fall upon people, right? I mean, eventually the facts fall upon people if they stay resistant to the truth. But as long as you, turn things around, repent, and accept the truth, those facts won't fall upon you, and you won't taste God's wrath unless you pray for God's wrath to come upon you, which was a mistake I made. I should never have done that. But then again, in a way, I kind of don't regret it, because I learned a lot, and I grew from the experience of God's wrath falling upon me. So, but I did pray for God's wrath to come upon me in 2017, and whew, schizophrenia, bipolar, the combination of the two, for a wicked psychosis. They would come and go in waves. I'd be normal for a little while and breaking stuff and getting arrested, the very next month. I was an alcoholic. I was a pothead, and it was really, really tough, because I would get sick from the alcohol while demons were screaming at me from the hallucinations of my schizophrenia, and my bipolar was making me break stuff, all the stuff that I paid for with my money. And so I could never keep anything nice in my apartment. I was constantly losing things, and I was crying because I regretted breaking the stuff. And then the voices are screaming at me, telling me I'm an idiot for breaking the stuff, or whatever they were telling me. making me feel even worse. And then I couldn't sleep at night because the voices kept screaming at me, and it was horrible. It was a nightmare. 4 years of hell, and then going to jail and being screamed at by voices in jail without having any distractions of alcohol or marijuana, and going in withdrawal from being without alcohol, and hungover, alcohol withdrawals, psychosis. Jail. Is like, man, I really tasted like a drop of God's wrath, and it was too much for an ordinary person to be able to bear. Even though I am an ordinary person and I bared it, but I guess I'm not that ordinary because, my innate conditions are a bit different, but whatever. All right. This video has gone on way too long. It's going to take forever for this video to upload. I already got up kind of late today. I got up at 12, and I had to throw up for about 30 minutes before I could even take my first, or smoke my first cigarette, and then get my first cup of coffee in, so this video is going to be coming out later today, which, I don't know why I'm saying that, because you guys aren't gonna even know about whatever. All right, God bless and goodbye. Thanks so much for watching. All right.